right, hello and welcome back to The Next Big Thing. My name is Chris Gannatti, Global Head of Research at WisdomTree, and today I'm joined by two colleagues. We have Pierre Debru. I know he's been a guest numerous times before. He's our Head of European Research, and then basically my co-host, who sometimes is hosting this podcast without me even here, Mobeen Tahir, who's a director in our research team, focuses an awful lot on thematics and travels throughout Europe all the time. And we can check in with him. We know in the past we've talked about his camera recognition system around his house and fun stories there. We've talked about his electric vehicle and fun stories there. So maybe he'll tell us how these things are going. But before we get to have any fun, we have to start. Before we begin, I need to state the following. To clarify, the views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of WisdomTree. We're all from WisdomTree and are subject to change. Anything we present in this podcast is not intended to be relied upon as a forecast, research, nor as investment or tax advice. The information and opinions expressed in this podcast are not a recommendation, offer, or solicitation to buy or sell any securities, and reliance upon them is at the sole discretion of the listener. Please remember, past performance is no indication of future results. And just to place us in historical context, in case big news is coming out, we are doing this recording, guys, 2 hours before the inauguration for the second time, because 8 years ago he was inaugurated once. President-elect Trump is going to be the president again in mere hours, and we'll see, obviously, how that begins to have an effect on thematics, on markets, on asset classes, and all the rest. But Pierre, one thing I was thinking to get started, it's now been, I think, since the summer of 2021, so almost 4 years since the initial publication of what we reference internally and what we put on the website in a report every month, the thematic universe. And I'm just curious if over those 4 years, as we dive in, we've just seen the data for the full year 2024. What if anything has surprised you in now seeing the continuity of a report like this? It's rare in our industry to. I mean, it's easy to have the report one time, but to have a report that gets refreshed monthly for 4 years is not as anywhere near as common. So I'm just curious what we've learned at WisdomTree doing this exercise every month.
But the first thing I think that's interesting is, at the end of the day, the interest of investors or client or professional investors, how you want to name them, into seeing this type of performance and flow information. At the end of the day, what we realize in the finance industry is that there is a lot of watching what everyone else is doing in some way. And that report is very much that for thematics. And what's quite unique, I think, with the report is that it's not information that is easy to find anywhere else, because thematic equity in some ways a little bit less well defined as maybe US equities or US small cap. And so when it comes to classify those type of funds, it's a little bit harder, it's a little bit more subjective in some way. And so there isn't that many organizations that have done that work of classifying all those funds. And so finding this information is not easy. So I'm always surprised by how much clients reach out to ask me, okay, where is the new data? What are you seeing this month? Where are the flow going, and so on. So that's for sure. The second thing I think, which is quite interesting and quite surprising as well, is the number of the evolution of the universe in terms of the number of funds, the new themes that you can now invest in, and the whole scope of it, right? Like we've had in 2020, 2021, we knew that thematics equity were very hot in some ways. There was a lot of launches, but even in 2022, 2023, which were a little bit more difficult for the performance of thematics, we still saw a lot of launches. We still saw a lot of investment managers trying new themes. trying new angles, and so the diversity of the universe is quite interesting right now. And so I was looking just before this call, how many funds do we now have in our classification, knowing that we started 4 years ago with around 1,500, and so we are now at 2,340. So quite a big increase in the number of fund and ETFs that we look at.
I hear that, and I think in some way that's a competitive research moat, because anyone thinking I'm just going to go in, create this report, this is not rocket science. Well, good luck doing that first exercise, and looking at all those 2,300. They don't all have the theme listed right there in the name. So some funds are more obvious than others, but if you're sitting there on the bubble thinking, is this robotics? Is this AI? Is this cloud? In some cases, it's easier said than done. But Pierre, there's something that I feel like happens. It doesn't happen like every month, but as the years go by, and there were two topics that I feel like, I could be wrong, but I feel like these two topics were not necessarily available. They obviously existed in 2021, but I don't know that they were in our thematic universe. One topic is nuclear, and one topic that's even more recent. And I know on the we split it up, and we have the European side and the U.S. side. And if you were to say what in December 2024 in the U.S., which we know is substantially larger in the ETF world than basically anywhere else, what was the biggest thematic topic? First of all, it was not semiconductors and NVIDIA for like the first time in some time, but it was actually quantum computing, which the crazy thing is there is no, commercially available quantum computer that's doing useful stuff, at least not yet to my knowledge. There is quantum technology, there is quantum encryption. That's not to say quantum doesn't exist. It's just a computer similar to what we think of as the giant servers running AI, that does not yet exist. And yet almost $400 million goes into quantum ETFs amongst US investors in 1 month, which is wild. And so when Pierre, you're seeing these new topics come up, like what's your approach in the monthly research and data that allows you to possibly incorporate these new topics as quickly as possible?
Yes, that's a good point. Like I was saying, the universe is diversifying a lot and is moving a lot, and the theme themselves is one aspect of that. I think in 2021 we started with around 39 or 40 themes, probably, that were investable either in Europe or the US, and now we are at 46. And you're right, quantum is the latest one, and nuclear was not there in 2020. You're right about this, because at the time it was all about renewable energy, green energy. As we know, nuclear is a bit on the fence. Some people like to say it's renewable, but it's not really renewable if you look at the EU taxonomy. So at the time, it was not in favor, I want to say, and there wasn't that many funds that were focusing on nuclear. But since 2022, we've seen a lot of new launches, and so now it is part of the thematic classification. So how do we approach the update of the classification? In some way, it's very much driven by the data and what we observe. At the end of the day, we try to classify every single thematic fund that is launched in Europe or in the US or in Asia, right? And every month there is one or two funds where we think, this one is a little bit borderline. Where does it really go in this theme, or is it a new theme, right? And so what we tend to do is we put those funds in the most the closest category, the closest theme we can find, but we put them into a kind of watch list, right? And then that watch list kind of grows, and sometimes we realize that in the watch list we start to have 2-3 funds that are now in the same new themes, and at that point we're going to say, okay, that kind of crystallize our view that there is it really makes sense, right, to split the category, split the theme in two, because now you have the older way to do the theme and you have kind of a new way. And if you think about AI right now, AI is one theme, but we are now starting to see those watchlist funds that are called AI infrastructure, or they call generative AI funds, and for now they're AI, but we can see down the line that AI theme may split into a smaller category, right? And that's the normal way that theme evolve. As they get more and more mainstream, you have what we would call sub-themes that become themes themselves, right? And then there is quantum, where I can't say that we have a full watch list of quantum fund, because there is only 2 funds in the category, in the theme right now, worldwide. But the theme is so different that you don't really have a choice, and you kind of have to create the category, right? And so that's what quantum computing is. It was obvious that it needed its own category because there was nowhere to put those funds in, basically.
Pierre, I remember from my days when I used to work as an investment consultant, we sometimes used to encounter this situation where we had clients asking about the performance of underlying funds, and we had to explain it. And there was one particular example I remember where a very clever strategy was having a challenging period for a few months. The performance was down, and we had to explain it, but we were unable to because a lot of the most important information was quite classified. Now, one thing I observe in your European version of the report is that ETFs certainly are acquiring a greater market share. Of course, mutual funds still dominate the market, but if we look at since 2017 to 2024, we see ETFs increasing their share. Maybe it's the transparency, maybe it's the tradability, maybe it's just a bigger menu of options. How do you see the evolution in the thematic space in terms of the menu of options? Is it getting people excited that they have more choices, or is it just making it the task of an investor even more difficult?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think the answer is a little bit both. Is that clearly with ETF entering the thematic space, I mean, they've been there for a while, but like more significantly since 2017, right? And you mentioned that since 2017, the market share of thematic ETF in Europe has doubled, basically. What we observe is that the menu is indeed wider, but also if you look at the main difference between thematic mutual fund and thematic ETF, is that thematic ETF tend to be more focused or pointed, if you want, towards a single theme. A lot of the mutual fund, they tend to have slightly more generic investment approach, like climate change, sustainability investment, technological shift, this type of things. When in the ETF world, you have quantum computing, solar, right? Very, very pointed investment objective. And there is a clear demand for that from investors, because there is quite a wide portion of professional investors, I want to say, but also over the whole gamut of investors that want to be able to play a specific theme at a given point in time. And I want to say probably quite tactically, right? To be able to say, okay, this is happening. There is clearly a lot of focus on this theme. I want to go in, right? Now, the other side of that coin is that it makes it a lot more difficult for investors that do not have a specific view on a specific theme, right? Like if you are maybe a wealth manager, a private bank, you have to manage a full portfolio for your client. You may not have the full time to go down the rabbit hole of 2,300 funds and 46 themes, right? And we are therefore seeing a second trend, which is a lot of interest in what we call multi-thematics or diversified thematics fund, but basically fund or ETF, where the investment manager takes upon himself to make all of the thematic decision on behalf of the investors, in the sense of which theme to invest in, how much to invest in each theme, how to select the different stock for the different theme, and so on, right? So we really have, interestingly enough, these two diametrically opposed way to invest in thematics, either very pointed into very, very specific theme, or almost the further away from the theme to and directly into the multi-theme world.
Is it then fair to say, I like that word that you used, tactical, because that always is a good way to frame the discussion. Is thematic investing a tactical enterprise, or is it a strategic thing? When you're investing in single themes, is that tactical, or and multi-thematic is strategic, or can you be tactical and strategic either in single themes or multi-thematic? And of course, a lot of our conversations, I remember, especially as we were closing last year, when we were talking thematic investing with clients, they were asking us, what are your hot ideas for next year? Everyone wants to know what's going to be the big theme for next year. And we try to keep our crystal ball with us in such client meetings. But of course, ultimately, some investors will be looking for tactical short-term ideas, and some might still be looking for ways to access long-term growth, and maybe they're looking for strategic exposure. What's your take in terms of your experience and interaction with clients? Or is thematic investing both tactical and strategic, and depends on investors depending on what they're looking for?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. And I think we have to acknowledge, right? We say thematic equity as if it was a small corner of the equity market, like would be emerging market small cap, right? But just to be clear, thematic equity is probably 40 to 50% of the full equity world, right? Like it's sliced differently. So it's not a small corner of the equity world, is a first point. And so in my mind, they're both strategic and tactical. Why? Because if you think about the long-term opportunities that thematic equity represent, it is a strategic opportunity. It is about investing in the companies that have the potential to benefit from the next big change in the world, right? And therefore to capture more growth than the rest of the equity market. And that's something that is almost permanent, right? So the world is changing all the time. And so there is always opportunity to capture that extra growth that comes from getting into the companies that are the most innovative and really align with what's changing, right? And we have done a lot of research around that strategic positioning in equities for thematic equity. So that's the strategic aspect. But having said that, even if thematic equity is strategic, even if you think about a specific theme like AI or quantum or solar, they tend to be long-term opportunities because the world does not change in one day, right? And so it makes sense also potentially to invest in one theme strategically if an investor has a strong view, strong belief, strong alignment to the theme, and the capacity to weather drawdown, right? It is also worth mentioning that the development of a theme, the growth of a theme is not linear. It is in fact extremely tactical in the sense that there are clear periods where a theme is, and I don't know a better word than this, but is hot and everyone cares about it and that everyone is talking about it and that translates into strong performance for the stocks. And there is clearly a period where the theme is cold. It doesn't mean that nothing happened in the theme, but the world attention is on something else. There is less attention on the theme. And while the theme is slowly developing in the background from an investment point of view, because of the lower interest or the lower focus, performance can be quite negative, right? And so there is clear tactical wave, let's call it like that, inside a single theme, right? And so it is clear that for a long-term investor that doesn't have strong thematic belief, a strategic investment in a multi-thematic is probably the easiest path forward, right? When if you have a very specific investors with a lot of interest in thematics, his investment may be more geared towards tactically investing in the odd theme and trying to rotate theme over time. But that requires a lot of time, a lot of know-how, and so for a lot of investors, that may make more sense to just outsource this rotation to a thematic investor, a thematic manager in a multi-thematic way.
So Pierre, to just help people to understand, size of market, and I'm looking at some of the numbers that are in the most recent U.S. report. So this is about the U.S. market, where you mentioned 2020 and 2021 were great years. Now, I don't know where they're going to fall in history, but it felt like at the time it didn't even matter what you launched. You could just put thematic in the title somewhere, because in 2019, just give people a sense here, in 2019, in the U.S. thematic equity market, the whole complex, all the ETFs together, $3.2 billion go in. And then in 2020, $47.2 billion go in. And then 2021, $51.7 billion go in. But then in a sense, quote unquote, it goes back to normal, because 2022 saw 2.7 billion going out, 2023 saw 4.4 billion going out, and just this past year 800 million came in. So 2020 and 2021 were, in a word, insane. The total AUM as we ended 2024 in US thematic ETFs was around 150 billion. And if we think of it by topic, the craziest thing, because we spend, you, me, Mobeen, other people on our team, we spend all this time trying to do smart stuff. And semiconductors they're not quite a third of that 150 billion, but they're 40 billion of the 150 billion. And semiconductors, you can just quickly, if you have access to certain data packages, FactSet, Bloomberg, whatever, you could just go to, GICS industry, and you can find all the semiconductor companies on any list of stocks that you could imagine. So everyone's doing all this smart stuff, finding all these cool companies. And the biggest category by far, 40 billion, is semiconductors. Then next is cybersecurity at about 11. So a big drop from 40 to 11 billion. Then health tech is around 8 billion. We talked about quantum computing earlier. That's less than 1 billion. It's sort of almost 800 million. And then Pierre, I want to get your take on whether it's the momentum or the potential of one topic in particular, which, again, we said in 2 hours, President-elect Trump is sworn in. One of the big things we know about the election process was cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, blockchain, all that stuff. You look, and blockchain is a theme, and on the US side, it's about 1.7 billion, give or take. So when you're thinking about thematics, one thing that mostly everyone who has thought about thematics has already done is they've already put in an allocation somehow to semiconductors, AI, the NASDAQ 100. Everybody has a view on how they're implementing AI if they're following this space. But few people so far have a view on their quote-unquote blockchain strategy. But if you think about it, in the past, blockchain was almost against the law. You weren't getting clear rules. Gary Gensler, one of the things that's happening today in roughly 2 hours is Gary Gensler steps down. We get a new SEC chair. So we get potentially a whole new regime of things, plus the performance hasn't been half bad of late. So Pierre, as you're thinking about thematics, how would you think about something like blockchain technology as a theme today, as we might be going into some fundamental and macro-oriented shifts specific to that space?
Yeah, so, clearly, as we said before, right, there is a lot of momentum in thematics, right? Some themes get hot, some themes get cold. And 2023, 2024, was very much a lot of AI and semiconductors, right? That's what everyone saw. That's a like top of the iceberg in some way. But we have started to see, as you mentioned, some themes that are going to benefit potentially from the change that we see macro-wise and from the change in presidency in the US, blockchain being one, but also cybersecurity being another one. And the reason for that is that on the blockchain side, you mentioned all of the change related to crypto that are obviously going to impact blockchain equities. The fact that the red sweep in the US has a potential to support small caps, right? Support maybe less developed company, less profitable company, like growing companies. And that's obviously where blockchain is right now. That's also where cybersecurity is mostly. That's also where cloud company tends to be as well. So all of those themes that have done not great in 2022 for sure, that have done okay in 2023, but not amazing, especially if you compare to the NASDAQ. And in 2024, blockchain has done extremely well, but cybersecurity and cloud have, again, if you compare to the NASDAQ, not done as well. All of those themes, they could benefit from this shift. And that's something we look quite specifically at when we build our own multi-thematic strategy, right? We have our own multi-thematic portfolio at WisdomTree, and that portfolio is meant to be a long-term strategic investment that invests into the main theme in the universe, but it also has a tactical overlay that every quarter looks at what are the themes that are the most in favor, that have the most momentum behind them. And as we look for Q1 2025, the 4 themes that got flagged are AI, blockchain, cybersecurity, and cloud, right? And what's interesting is that semiconductor did not get flagged, right? And so it could potentially point to this kind of change in regime in some way, where we're moving away from the NVIDIA and the semiconductor a little bit towards smaller cap software, and that could be what we see for the rest of at least Q1 H1. Now, I know, Mobeen, you're writing an outlook on thematic equity for 2025. So, I mean, maybe you want to extend on that, and if that's what you see as well.
Yeah, I agree. And I think we started talking about this idea that we were probably going into a more favorable interest rate environment from this maybe third quarter, fourth quarter of last year, and that became a better situation for these sorts of themes like the ones you mentioned. And now with Trump 2.0 about to start, as Chris mentioned, in a few hours as we record this, a more favorable regulatory macro backdrop is something that supports these sorts of tech themes. So for anyone who's engaged with our research, watch this space. We'll be talking about that theme as an important driver, tailwind behind some of these themes as well.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable. All the things that we've learned. One of the things I was thinking about as we were, again, reflecting back and saying it's been about 3.5, not quite 4 years of running this report. In some cases at WisdomTree, we've been looking at certain thematic strategies for longer than 6 years at this point. In some cases, certain others have been around for 4 or 5 years. The thing that I admit that has surprised me, because if you're doing thematic research in 2018 and 2019, as we were, and we're sitting down and we're saying, okay, we're going to build a strategy, particularly in the software space. So you guys mentioned cloud computing and cybersecurity. These are largely software as a service. What does the customer do? They basically decide, I'm going to use this program. I pay, for this many years up front or on a yearly basis. This is what I pay. Many people have heard, the annual recurring revenue, the growth in annual recurring revenue, and that's the focus of the software as a service business model. But you were sort of thinking in the initial research, every year there's a certain number of new companies that come into the mix. And so you saw in the first few years, since we were running these certain strategies, you would get a few more companies here, a few more companies there. What was the source? It was basically private companies going into the public market. Something that appears different in 2025, January, as we sit here, is the same motivation, at least amongst the biggest companies that we all hear about in software on the private side. That same motivation to go public does not appear to be the same. The employees at these companies are able to cash in their interest when they need to, and to get the liquidity that they need. The businesses themselves seem to be able to get the capital that they need, and there just isn't that same impetus. I know by the most recent recollections I have, there's the company SpaceX, which is out there. I know not in software, but it's valued, around 350 billion. OpenAI is valued, 150 to 160 billion. I mean, so, some of these numbers that you see in terms of the valuation of private companies would rival some of the largest public companies in the world were you to transition into the public markets at roughly the same valuation. So I was just curious if either of you had seen or had any thoughts about trends like that, or potentially other trends that you're seeing, because a lot of people, they approach 2025 and one of the easiest things to say is, well, there have been no IPOs, maybe we'll see more IPOs, but honestly I have no idea. There's been little M&A activity, maybe because of FTC chair Lena Khan, and maybe the new administration is more supportive of that. But again, I don't really know if there's going to be more M&A. It's just a nice prediction to make. So I'm just wondering what you guys are seeing as you think about 2025 and what we may see in some of these more specific areas.
Yeah, I think sometimes with these sorts of things, people get a cue in terms of which topics to get excited about from even what companies in the private space are doing. One example I recently found very interesting was like looking at Synthesia the other day in the AI space, and attracting high valuations, doing really well, doing AI video applications, and I think private companies are doing some very interesting things. And maybe another example to mention here was what happened with the Google bid for Wiz last year, like a cybersecurity company, niche expertise in the cloud cybersecurity space, having the audacity to turn down a bid of $23 billion from Google. Now imagine, I mean, if someone offered me $23 billion for anything, I would probably not even think twice. But they had the audacity to do that because maybe they were so assured of what a product they had, and the value that it offers to markets, that they turned it down. And of course, Google were willing to pay that sort of sum because they recognize the importance of this theme. So you mentioned SpaceX, Chris. I know people are looking at the space theme as well. And maybe we will see more private activity in this space, and what private companies are doing in different themes is a good way for people to get interested in certain themes, and then keep an eye on how that theme evolves and companies enter the public market, and maybe that's when they become more investable. Pierre, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's very hard to predict what's going to happen in from private to public, right? In IPOs and stuff. What's clear is that there has been historically cycles, right? Where some years you have lots of IPOs, some years you have a lot less. And maybe 2024 was a bit more extreme than what we've seen before. But it's, like this saying, like, this time is different, right? It's like the most dangerous thing in finance, right? This time is different. So I would not bet that, we are seeing a completely complete breakdown of the IPO market or the M&A market, and no company will ever be public ever again, right? Like, I think at the end of the day, there are a handful of companies, right, which you mentioned, SpaceX, OpenAI, they do have very special circumstances where they can probably get away with staying private very, very long. There is also a huge tail of company which don't have the same name recognition in the general public that may struggle a little bit more. So I would be very careful about thinking that this is now the new normal, and so I would expect to see quite a few IPOs in the next few years, and that's great for all of the thematic strategy we've been discussing, because obviously all of the thematic strategy we've been discussing invest in public equities, and so having these new entrants will allow to have even more interesting strategies.
So, something I'm curious about, and just again, as we do this recording for the audience's benefit, I'm sitting in Charlotte, North Carolina, so I travel around frequently the U.S. market, and on the U.S. side, if you mention the dreaded three letters ESG, there's a certain feeling, especially if you try to do it in, say, Florida or Texas. Maybe in California you get away with it, but it's almost like you have these different pockets of favorability or disfavorability towards that topic. Now, in 2021, I remember, and I was living in London at that time, and I remember the idea of clean energy. I remember the idea of alternative forms of energy, those COP meetings, which I think are still going on. But in 2021, this was like a blockbuster sort of event. I don't know if the event is quite as big these days, because the world, it feels like, has shifted in its view and how it looks at the quote unquote green ideas and green themes. And I'm curious what you are seeing, because I know Europe's view on a lot of these matters is not the same as the US. So when you go around Europe now, I don't get the impression that anyone is excited about the more green themes these days, even if idealistically or morally there is that sense that, of course, they're still important. But you look at the returns, you're not necessarily seeing them at the top of the list amongst the 47 or so topics that we look at. So I'm personally wondering, particularly you, Mobeen, as you're thinking of the outlook for 2025, do we think that the energy and the green energy and these kind of topics could come back a bit this year, or is it another year of just sort of bouncing around without a clear direction on these topics, which again were some of the biggest topics in thematics, particularly in Europe, say back in 2021, which wasn't that long ago?
So, Chris, we recently had the Consumer Electronics Show in the US, hosted by the Consumer Technology Association, which some of our audience might know. An organization we work with very closely. Something that stood out to me from that conference was how every device, from humanoid robots to all sorts of other gadgets, cars and whatnot, are becoming AI enabled. Now, every device that used to be just connected in the past, we used to call it the Internet of Things, is now becoming the Internet of AI enabled things. Now, of course, that's great. That gives us a lot of functionality, but that also means that there's going to be a lot of energy demand from all of these applications. The rule of thumb from the International Energy Agency, I can never forget, a ChatGPT query is 10 times the amount of energy as a Google search. So just imagine how many queries these different devices are going to do those AI computations. So we know energy demand is going up. And in my view, the biggest challenge for the world, one of the biggest challenges for the world going forward, is going to be how do we power our energy needs sustainably? Where is that power actually going to come from? Which is why I think energy independence is going to be a big theme going forward, particularly with data centers powering the growth behind artificial intelligence and other such power hungry technologies. And I think that explains why we see nuclear coming back into the mix in some of the reports that Pierre was mentioning earlier. Because with advances like small modular reactors, nuclear has become part of the same discussion as wind and solar practically. Because what does wind and solar do? It gives you localized form of energy, which can make a data center energy independent. Because if they put wind uh, uh, turbines close to them, or if they have solar panels, then they don't have to rely on fossil fuels, which might be influenced by geopolitics and so forth. So the same idea, we see Google turning to nuclear, we see Microsoft turning to nuclear, we see Amazon turning to nuclear, and it's all probably that energy independence theme. So I think that theme is definitely only just getting started, because all that tech that is being built will have to be powered somehow. And the question will be, where will that power come from? And will it be a source of power that can make uh, the user of that power energy independent? So that's definitely a theme that we will continue to keep an eye on and follow very closely.
Now, on a related topic, and I know, Mobeen, you've spent a lot of time, because at WisdomTree we have a big, vibrant commodities business. We look at all sorts of different metals, and when you look at all these different metals, you're kind of saying, okay, what are you going to use them for, and what's going to be the demand for these different use cases. And I sit back and think batteries, in theory, should be one of the most important things that the world produces. Maybe semiconductors are competing for the most important thing, and we see, the geopolitical tensions and rules and executive orders related to semiconductors seemingly every other week, and we'll see if the new administration has updates that they want to make in terms of semiconductors. But then, if we're thinking, and I feel like most of the Western world is thinking about wind and is thinking about solar, so intermittent energy sources, to really make those scale up and work the way that they're going to have a true impact on whether it's the amount of carbon in the atmosphere or the amount of power that we're going to have. We're going to also need batteries working in tandem. And yet, the battery theme, if you look at the investment performance in recent years, my excitement and my view that we need more batteries and the demand for batteries should only be going in one direction, up and to the right. Certainly the investment returns are not going up and to the right. So Mobeen, can you help me square the circle? What's been going on, and is it possible that batteries and the actual investment returns amongst the battery complex and companies might have a better 2025?
Yeah, I think given how much this theme has been penalized in recent times, it's almost become a value play, given the promise, going forward. And I fully agree. Like you can't just build wind uh, turbines and solar panels without having sufficient energy storage. I mean, what happens when the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing? We need energy storage, and we need energy storage of various types, and batteries are among the most reliable and well-established forms of energy storage today. So I think that theme is certainly going to make a comeback. I know in your report, Pierre, and I will relay this question on to you, because in your report we've seen, even as I look at the European report, and we see performance and flows, we see sustainable energy production, we see energy storage, those sorts of themes consistently featuring, and not in among the top 5 but among the bottom 5. So I fully concur with Chris's observation that it's a bit of a conundrum as to why that is happening, but perhaps it's more macro factors, like industrial metals have been facing macro challenges. So with with a slowdown in China, and there's been negative sentiment for a couple of years there. There has been some negative press around the adoption of electric vehicles. Maybe that's weighed on people. Maybe we were just coming off that wave in 2020, 2021, where there was a lot of excitement, and then there's been a pullback. And now it's the right time for it to pick up cyclically once again. What is your take on that?
Yeah, so I think there's a bit of a difference probably between the US and Europe, as you know, Mobeen. I am not sitting in Charlotte myself. I'm sitting in France right now. So clearly there is a little bit of a different environment. What's clear is that we've seen massive outflow in green-related theme in 2024 in Europe as well, right? I was looking just before. There was 32 billion of outflows if you look in thematics in Europe this year or in 2024, and more than 2/3 of it is coming from green theme and principally clean energy and batteries, right? So there is also clearly that movement away from green theme. The small difference maybe with the US, it is that it is not as much political or cultural, and it is a lot more investment driven, right? Those themes have not done well for a very long time. I mean, 2-3 years. A lot of investors had done really well in 2019, 2020, 2021 with them. So basically, investors are coming out and rotating into themes that are flying a lot more right now, right? Which is AI, semiconductors, and so on. So the way we describe it in Europe is maybe more as an ESG fatigue more than anything else, right? ESG was ESG was everything people were talking about between 2019 and 2022. And so performance being what it is, we are seeing a lot of investors interested to discuss other things and the time being. The long-term potential, though, as you were saying, Mobeen, is still there. Even if we don't want to talk about climate change or the necessity to potentially have carbonless energy, the energy independence need is extremely clear, right? In Europe, it is probably even more clear than the US because of the attack of Russia in Ukraine a few years back and the impact that has had on gas, right? If you look at France, we had one of the leading nuclear program in the 60s, in the 70s, right? And then in the 90s, in the 2000s, we stopped building nuclear plants, right? And then you have Russia attacks Ukraine, gas starts slowing down, or at least not coming as much from Russia. And what did France do? They started in a big way again their nuclear plant program, right? And that's, so in France, we do it through nuclear because that's our thing, apparently. But if you look at other European countries, that has translated into investment in solar, in wind turbine. And again, it is not an ESG reaction. It is a geopolitical reaction, right? It is a way to isolate your country from the influence of energy-rich countries like Russia in a big way in Europe. So the long-term potential for those technologies is clearly there. But we discussed before, thematics are cyclical in some way, in the sense that they have up period and down period. And there is no doubt that 2021, 2020 were a huge period of exuberance on grid technology. Performance of stocks was moving way beyond, right, the development of this technology and the companies behind them, right? And so what we've seen now is a pullback from that. And as happens usually, that pullback is probably overreaching as well. And so I strongly believe there is going to be another wave that will benefit clean energy and battery in the future. Now, timing those waves are extremely difficult because very often they are not the result of something that happened in a specific company or something that happens because of fundamentals. It's usually what I tend to call an external trigger. So think about COVID for cloud in 2020, right? And so when will this external trigger come in? It's very, very hard to pinpoint. But I strongly believe it's coming. If we go back again to our multi-thematic strategy that use mostly momentum to try to tactically rotate theme, those green themes are still massively underweight. There is still has not been a clear signal from us to go back in, but it could come at any point, I think.
So as time winds down, and unfortunately we can't spend the full day just talking about these topics, which I mean there's so many of them, but I know our audience loves to hear from Mobeen on autos, cars, mobility. They know it's a passion of his. I heard out of Japan that Nissan and Honda are potentially thinking of coming together as one firm. And in general, one of the things you're kind of seeing is Tesla's over here valued as anything other than actually making cars, so AI, robots, autonomous robotaxi, etc. All that stuff makes a company that's worth well north of $1 trillion, depending on the day that you look. And then BYD is selling an awful lot of actual electric vehicles in any market that allows Chinese products to be marketed. And then all the legacy car makers, it's difficult to point to any one of them and say they're not faced with some difficult operational constraints and concerns. And I was in Germany towards the end of last year, and the German investors were talking about their own market, saying it's very difficult for a lot of these players, whether it's Mercedes, BMW, you name it, to see where they're going to generate that next source of growth and return. So Mobeen, as we come to the close, I'd love for you to just give the audience your sense of what you're seeing in electric vehicles and mobility.
I'm here in the UK, Chris. I increasingly see more and more BYD cars on the road. Some of them very, very nice looking, and some very high tech features inside them at a much more competitive price than some of the alternatives in the market. And that's exactly what BYD and some of the other Chinese manufacturers have done. They're appealing to the mass market with very advanced technology, all the features that a consumer would want, and that's catching the legacy car makers off guard. And I've been very critical of some of the legacy car makers that they've been a bit complacent. Their policy is not equipped to compete with this new wave of technology that's coming. Cars aren't the same cars as 10, 15, 20 years ago. It's not just about going from place A to B. It's the whole powertrain has changed, and it's about having the right technology to be connected, to have those AI features and so forth. So you're practically making a computer on wheels rather than just a transporting machine. And if you're a legacy car maker still making transporting machines, then you're not up to speed with the trend. So I expect to see big changes in the auto space. This consolidation in different legacy car makers coming together has not surprised me. I think the other evolving story will be how European car makers react to the growing strength of Chinese players in the continent. How, of course, the policy from President Trump is going to take effect in terms of tariffs, how Europe will do its own tariffs and so forth. But it's an exciting space. I mean, technology is evolving. Lots of cool stuff is happening. I mentioned CES earlier. There was certainly a Chinese flying car coming out of a trailer, which was one of the highlights of the event for me. I don't know how much that will take off, no pun intended, but certainly automakers are looking to wow the market with some exciting new products, and that makes it an interesting space as a thematic investor to look at.
I know one of the things I'll be watching is anytime the new administration mentions anything with the idea of whether it's robo-taxis, autonomous driving, the trajectory of improving features. As a driver, you can absolutely see that cruise control, what you used to think of as cruise control, which was just one button and the car maintains a certain speed, it is certainly not that anymore. It's adjusting to traffic and doing all these different things depending which car you have. Sometimes it's even recognizing the lanes and things. So you're getting incremental advancements, even if the car itself doesn't fully do everything. But we do keep discussing it, and to have these very expensive assets, more or less for more than 90% of their useful life, sitting there, whether it's a parking lot, at a driveway, a garage, whatever it might be, you're in a position thinking if you could monetize even a portion, maybe you take it from it's sitting there 95% of the time to it's sitting there 75% of the time. So it's still sitting there a lot, but you do something useful with that incremental 20%. Maybe economically speaking, that's a big difference. But unfortunately, that is all the time that we have for this particular episode, our first episode of 2025. We're going to be coming back, though. You're going to hear from me. You're going to hear from Mobeen. Pierre will probably be a guest a few more times this year. So definitely stay tuned. Keep subscribing and keep, whether it's a review, a rating, a good rating, a bad rating, we take it all, and we try to improve as we continue to move forward. So I definitely thank everyone for their continued listenership and viewership, and we look forward to our next episode on the next big thing. We'll see you soon.